For this next segment, I'm going to ask my co-authors to join me, and we'll be presenting, as soon as I get it up on the screen, the results of our study. I'd like to introduce Jonathan Dworin, who's a graduate student at the Humphrey School here, who has been doing the lion's share of the work and putting this report together, doing all the number crunching, working and setting up interviews, as well as Nebiyou Tilahun, who did a special analysis looking at occupational data, and he'll talk about that. So I think I'll just get started here and tell you a little bit more about the study itself. This study was done with the support of the University of Minnesota's Metro Consortium, which provided us a grant to analyze Minneapolis-St. Paul's competitive traded clusters. The state and local policy program, which I had, has conducted regional industry cluster studies since 1995. In fact, the very first study that we did was with the Metropolitan Council, and we looked at 4 clusters, and Libby Starling, who is going to be on the panel a little bit later today, was actually a graduate student here and research assistant who worked on that study and played a primary role in sort of shaping our initial work using Michael Porter's framework from Harvard Business School to analyze clusters in the Twin Cities area. In 2009, we worked with support from the Department of Employment and Economic Development with the ULI Regional Council of Mayors, and Jim Hovland, mayor of Edina, who co-chairs that organization, is going to be here later today. We were doing this work at about the same time that Itasca was in the process of recommending forming an organization which led to the greater MSP to act as a regional economic development organization. We have been a regional partner with Michael Porter's Institute for Strategy Competitiveness at the Harvard Business School in developing what's called the U.S. Cluster Mapping Tool for the Economic Development Administration, and this tool is currently available on the web to be able to analyze clusters in a state or a region and be able to compare your clusters with those in other states and regions. And so we use that as a base tool. And if you look at the chart, this shows 41 traded clusters. Those are clusters that sell their product outside of the region, and how the overlaps indicate linkages among these clusters, and the colors indicate the concentration of the clusters in the region. And so if you have a location quotient of more than 1, that means that you have a higher share compared to the national average. As you can see, medical devices in the middle, we have about 3.75. Analytical instruments, lighting and electrical equipment are all clusters that are very strong, but then we have a number of other clusters like production technology, publishing and printing. And we, for this study, we wanted to take a more in-depth look at these clusters where we are competitive. This is actually the second report that we have done. An earlier report we did as part of the EDA project, and both of these reports now are published on the EDA's cluster mapping site. The first one was a case study looking at the development of greater MSP, the involvement of the Regional Council of Mayors, as well as sort of the earlier work that we did in the Regional Cluster Initiative and sort of the emerging regional economy. The second report is the one we'll be talking about today, And that one is where we took a more in-depth look at each of these clusters. The report is available on the web, and hopefully a number of you have had a chance to take a look at it. But a feature of the report is that for each of the 12 clusters, we have a dashboard followed with information about sort of employment patterns, concentration of employment, some of the major companies, and these dashboards provide sort of a snapshot of where we are with the industry today. By the way, I should mention that the period that we're looking at, there's always a lag in this kind of local data. So the data that we were working with was from 1998 to 2010. The Department of Employment and Economic Development has more recent data, not the sort of comparable data with other states, but they were able to give us numbers from 2010 to 2012. Numbers didn't, few issues with the numbers, but we were showing the growth rates here using the same cluster categories. And as you can see, with a number of these clusters, we've been doing quite well. Lighting and electrical equipment, 14% growth in just the last 2 years. Metal manufacturing, management of companies, which is the term used by the government for corporate headquarters, has strong growth over this period. Production technology. We had a few that haven't been doing quite as well, but in the last 2 years, but you can see we have the most recent patterns. These are the clusters that we looked at. They are, the chart you see in front of you shows the size of the bubble, shows represents the employment, and if it's above that blue line, above 1, it means that we have a higher concentration. Medical devices, you can see we've had a higher concentration, and we've also been increasing our competitiveness. We've become more concentrated relative to the nation over this period from 1998 to 2010. Management of companies, again, that's corporate headquarters, a very large bubble. And we'll talk more about that in our presentation. We used the Porter's Diamond of Advantage as a framework for analyzing these clusters. It included quantitative work as well as qualitative interviews to try to get a better understanding of what was going on. Basically, what Porter says is what's important is what drives innovation and productivity. So factor conditions, demand conditions, particularly local demand conditions, related and supporting industries, as well as firm strategy, structure, and rivalry are sort of the key components that drive innovation and productivity improvement, and ultimately the success of clusters in a region. So I want to go through quickly some of the key findings that are in the report, sort of a summary of what we learned from these. And then I'm going to ask Jonathan to elaborate a little bit more on some of the higher level findings. Factor conditions, a lot of this is what we know, but our study confirmed that the MSP region depends on a skilled workforce, particularly in engineering, medical, IT, design, production, logistics, and distribution fields. So these are all sort of occupational areas that are key to the clusters in our region. The University of Minnesota, we're happy to say, plays a critical role in research and education of many of these high-skilled workers. MSP's larger number of corporate headquarters compete for the best talent within the region and attract highly productive workers to the region. And I know there's been additional work done by Carlson School. Miles Shaver has been looking at this further to find out what's behind that. And I think what our study confirms a lot of what he's finding in that area. MSP's clusters historically developed and still benefit from Minnesota's natural resources, food, lumber, minerals, and water. And the 9th Federal Reserve District's home and corporate headquarters stimulate robust financial service and insurance industry. With regard to demand conditions, past local demand from computer and telecommunications industries and now the medical devices cluster have contributed to the development of the region's electrical equipment, analytical instruments, and metal manufacturing clusters. Some of these other clusters are not always as visible as the medical device cluster, but they're there and they're important in terms of supporting, and these linkages strengthen our economy. Increased global demand for food, feed, and fiber due to economic growth and demographic shifts in key developing countries such as China and India are creating opportunities for the region's globally competitive processed food companies. And if you look at what's been driving that our growth in gross state product, a lot of that's related to food and agricultural products. Sophisticated local demand for healthy food and green products has helped to influence the direction of the region's legacy food companies and entrepreneurs. So the companies that have been here doing business for a long time are doing well, but there's also new entrepreneurship opportunities here. Corporate headquarters contribute to favorable regional demand conditions for the financial industry, as well as other clusters such as publishing and printing, advertising, and legal and business services in the region. So there's a whole group of different types of services and industries that have benefited by sort of the high quality requirements of these large corporations for services and for products. And if you're able to sell to one of these large corporations, it also puts you in a good position to sell your products outside of the region. Local demand from the region's competitive industries has contributed to the development of companies in production technologies and other clusters involved in improving productivity through technology and process improvements. We're going to be talking about some of this later on. We talk about robotics, but there's a whole set of companies here that are involved in how do you improve the production process. With regard to related and supporting industries, due to the high concentration of corporate headquarters in Minnesota, there are many strong related and supporting companies headquartered in the region. Our analytical instruments cluster is tied closely to the region's past and current success in medical devices and lighting and electrical equipment clusters. And our transportation and logistics and distribution service clusters are related to many other clusters, as nearly all traded clusters require some form of transportation, distribution, and logistical services. And we've been doing additional work with the Minnesota Department of Transportation to better understand how we can use our advantages in transportation and build on those to support our cluster development. The MSP clusters benefit from the high caliber professional services available, including accounting, advertising, legal, and marketing, and the information technology products and services are utilized by a large and growing segment of the economy, and its employees are often recruited to fill in-house IT positions in competitive MSP clusters. We had a very strong robust computer hardware and supercomputer industry at one time, which we lost, but a lot of that IT activity continues here and is embedded in several clusters. Finally, firm strategy, structure, and rivalry. Our strengths in multiple clusters combined with the concentration of major corporate headquarters create an ecosystem that is ripe for innovation and entrepreneurship across clusters. All of those linkages all create opportunities for new development and innovation, and it's quite frequently these linkages between clusters that are important for future job growth. The region's corporate headquarters and major employers have competed historically for talented workers and occasionally recruiting from one another's ranks. So the fact that we have a pool of talent related to management as well as specialized types of skills in running companies benefits the region. And the region's corporate headquarters tend to focus their attention to global and national competitors, often, I should say they're all focused on that, often sharing supportive rather than rivalry-based relationships with one another. So, you know, when we first time we did a study, we talked to some of the people that were involved in the formation of the computer industry here, and they talked about the fact that even though they were competing with each other, they were all talking and sharing information and skills, and there's still a good amount of that going on, that people, because people are here, because they're working in these areas, they're all part of the community that supports this sort of competitive relationship, but also a cooperative relationship. So I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan, who's going to talk about the additional findings.
Great, thanks, Lee. Good morning, everyone. So this is a point that has been mentioned by both Lee and Michael Langley, but it really is a point that is worth repeating, because we really saw it throughout the entire process of our project, was that corporate headquarters play a pivotal role in shaping the region's economy. And this is apparent both on the left and on the right. The left is a map of Fortune 500 companies within the region. On the right, you can kind of see a face to the name of a lot of these companies. And what you found is that not only are they diverse in that they span a multitude of industries, but really each industry that we covered is really headlined or anchored by one or two of these companies. And these aren't just Fortune 500 companies, but also some of these mid-sized companies that would maybe your Fortune 1000 companies, and also several very large private industries such as Carlson or Cargill or holiday markets. And in reality, the analysis of the Minneapolis-St. Paul economy is really based on your analysis of these corporate headquarters, because they truly are your anchor institutions. But we also found, as we were conducting our study, and Leah mentioned this earlier, is that there are a lot of linkages that are going on throughout the economy. And these linkages can be found in a variety of ways. And the first is between your big and your small companies. And this is really your Fortune 500 or your other large companies interacting with some other smaller companies throughout the supply chain or as entrepreneurship. This is very clear in the medical device industry. A lot of these larger medical device companies that have found themselves in the region are in some way or another a spin-off of another medical device company. Or you also saw it with iMation and 3M, and that the ability for larger companies to really link with some of these smaller companies has in many ways sprouted many new companies, continuing the growth of the regional economy. You also saw that companies link up throughout the state of Minnesota. This is probably most clear in the processed food industry, and this is true not only from a supply chain standpoint, but also just a knowledge sharing standpoint. You have a wide variety of size companies throughout the state of Minnesota, a lot of whom are doing very similar things and are in reality working together in a lot of ways. And what we found when we were doing these interviews is that especially in the early stages of a company, the ability to have a local supply chain was really important for their competitive advantage. It was really important to them, given Minneapolis-St. Paul's location, to have some form of supply chain that is regional or within the state. Finally, and I thought most interesting, was that we found a lot of linkages that existed throughout these clusters. I think a lot of people's main critique of the cluster is that it kind of buckets a lot of companies, or it buckets a lot of your industries, but in reality we found that there is a lot of overlap, which I think with the image on the left that Lee spoke about earlier really tells to. For example, this summer we learned about the insurance industry and the processed food industry collaborating on nutrition and preventative nutrition. And perhaps the best anecdote that we came across this entire process was Chart Industries in New Prague, Minnesota. Actually was formed originally as they made containers for bull semen, and now they make large-scale metal containers for natural gas. So we really saw this industry, based on a company, really spanning a multiple industries. And this is what we found as well, is that as these industries evolve, older companies begin to change their ways a little bit, and new companies begin to emerge. And ultimately, some industries began to emerge as well. We saw company changes happen, most notably Norwest Bank and Delta, and the mergers and acquisitions really changed the way that these companies focused their operations in Minneapolis-St. Paul. We saw changes in industry really changing the way in which a lot of industries have had to work, such as United Healthcare, the medical device industry, have really been able to pick up in a lot of ways because of some of the changes that have been made to the healthcare system. And finally, we saw that technological advancements have also really changed the way in which these companies have operated. A classic example of this would be Thomson Reuters, and the publishing and printing industry is drastically different now than it was, say, 20 years ago, largely because of these technological advancements. And most manufacturing industries require some form of prototyping, which in a lot of these companies are starting to use 3D printing as a way to give themselves a competitive advantage. And what we've seen are evolved companies, and in many instances, evolved industries as a whole. And I guess this slide should have some form of a disclaimer as a spoiler warning. Minneapolis-St. Paul is really poised to be a leader in several of these emerging industries. These are the 4 that we have alluded to in our project. However, a case could be made for a variety of other industries as well. I'm only going to go over these in brief because we have an entire panel devoted to talking about them. But the robotics industry, the biorenewables industry, the water tech industry, and 3D printing are all very emerging industries that don't necessarily fall into a well-defined cluster category, but are all industries that are certainly important to the regional economy and will prove to be even more important to the economy as it begins to progress. Another big thing was that innovation and entrepreneurship must continue to be the drivers of growth for the economy. Michael Langley spoke earlier about telling your story and the ability of Minneapolis-St. Paul to have a good perception that it is a good place to do business. However, they are faced with some struggles with regards to innovation and entrepreneurship. A lot of people talk about the difficulty in doing business, especially for small businesses, and the entrepreneurship and venture capital indicators seem to be lacking. But this aside, innovation and entrepreneurship still seem to be doing well in the region, and the culture of this is evident. You saw big companies coming out of the last decade or so, like United Health's huge emergence as a insurance player, Stratus in 3D printing, and BioAmber's large IPO. You see a lot of support programs going around in the nonprofit sector with things like COCO in order to enhance innovation and entrepreneurship in the region. And what you're finding again is that the company headquarters and these large industries and the developed industries continue to innovate as well, giving the region some form of competitive advantage. And finally, and really perhaps most importantly, is that all interviews that we did throughout the course of this study, throughout all of the clusters that we analyzed, saw human capital as a main reason why companies should choose to stay and continue to thrive in Minneapolis-St. Paul. As you can see, the proportion of the workforce with a bachelor's degree has continued to rise in Minnesota. We have a very qualified workforce. Schools, universities, community colleges, trade schools, and companies themselves continue to train our workers, and it really creates a perpetuating loop of talented workers in the regional economy. And on that note, I will turn it over to Nebiyou, who will talk a bit more about this knowledge sharing.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good morning. So I'll continue on from where Jonathan left off, which is the importance of a skilled workforce in the region. And this is, so I have a quote here from 1890 that suggests that this is nothing new. Alfred Marshall said that the mysteries of, so when skilled workforce and knowledge is concentrated in a place, the mysteries of the trade become no mysteries, but are as it were in the air. So he says that good work is rightly appreciated, inventions and improvements have their merits discussed, and ideas are taken up by others and improved. So in a sense, this concentration of skilled workforce creates this virtuous cycle where you have the skill concentration driving, in our current economy, firms preferring this location to be where they're based, and that concentration of firms in turn drives a skill concentration in the region. And part of the ways in which this knowledge base enriches the different employers that we have is through this shared this knowledge sharing and skill sharing that happens, and this may happen through informal channels, through just personal relationships of people who are in the same sector, who know each other, or through other formal channels where you have trade organizations and trade publications, and knowledge is shared from one sector to another. But another way that this can happen is also through people changing jobs. So if you all think about your own work-life histories, you can sort of think about how you have taken experiences from one place and enriched and use that in your work requirements in other places. So it sort of creates this, so this transfer of workers creates opportunities for knowledge sharing. And this may happen in some cases within the same sector. For example, you can think about sectors within the medical manufacturing who may hire each other's employees, but it can also happen between sectors. So somebody who works in the financial sector, maybe doing some type of technology auditing, may be transferred over to a medical manufacturer, may find work in medical manufacturing, and takes that experience and apply it in some other sector. So from what we have seen so far, we have seen that the diversity of sectors that are present in the region, and this is a very good thing. It says the region is resilient, so we are not dependent on one particular sector. It means a particular shock that may happen in one sector is unlikely to affect others or less likely to affect others. But none of these sectors are an island, and that's part of this, what drives this cluster idea, that there are linkages. And these linkages can be of many types. So there may be trading linkages between sectors, and in previous studies we have looked at this, and we see a significant amount of trading occurring between sectors in the region. And in fact, things like medical manufacturing, finance, insurance, you can see that they buy significant amounts from locally based sectors, in some cases 2-3% of total output going from one sector to another. But the relationship also could be indirect, in that you may have sellers of inputs, part of which is captured in that diamond of advantage, where you have factor conditions, and suppliers being what tie different sectors together, or it may be that different sectors are selling to similar buyers. So there are different forms of relationships that one can think of. And the one that we focused in this particular study is to see what type of skilled workforce is present in the region, and which are currently being shared by the basic sectors in the region. So it's not like, so we don't have the data to say, okay, this percentage of workforce in this particular sector has moved over to some other sector, but this sort of tells you, okay, take statisticians. So which sectors are currently hiring statisticians? So it's an indicator of the possibility for knowledge flow from one sector to another. So in this case, management of companies are interested in statisticians. The electromedical manufacturing sector is also interested in statisticians. So it's an indicator that says there's the potential for significant amount of knowledge sharing. So a little bit on how we did this analysis. My apologies for the very small font, but the details of this sectors is in the report. So what we have done is not to take all of the workforce that's present in the region, because then you would have, as a potential for knowledge sharing, fields such as maybe secretaries being linking up sectors in the region. So we had to trim down the list of occupations based on which similarities in hiring were created. And so this is in some ways a subjective process, but we created several layers of categories. So the first is to say only occupations that show up in 5 or fewer sectors are going to be a basis for analyzing similarities in hiring. And when we do that, out of the total 400-some different occupations present in the region, we have a very small subset, about 50 occupations that match that criteria. And then we go over to the sector side, which are these red circles. And we try to see how many of those hire at least 3 of those specialized sectors in this first case. So we see things like management of companies, this semiconductor and other electronic component manufacturing, electromedical manufacturing, and navigational measuring and electronics manufacturing sectors showing up, and things like occupations like material engineers, environmental engineers, statisticians, logisticians, drafters show up as important to all of these different sectors. And so we sort of loosen the criteria on one end, saying, okay, now we base the classification for occupations which are showing up in green to allow up to allow them to be in at least 10 sectors to be considered specialized, but then we increase the requirement on the employer side to say, okay, now they must hire at least 8 of these specialized sectors, and so on. So we continually strengthen one requirement as we loosen the other, and we do this over 4 different criteria. And what you see is, number one, a significant overlap of the sectors that you identify as wanting this specialized workforce requirement being the same sectors that you would find by applying different ways of this cluster analysis. So either the economic trading relationship based analysis or the geographic analysis. So many of the same sectors show up in these different methodologies. So the main findings from here is that we see that the region's workforce, so there's a considerable potential for knowledge flow between sectors in the region. And we think this is part of a virtuous cycle where both the skill requirements makes the region attractive, the skill concentration makes the region attractive for different employers, and the employer concentration makes it attractive for different sectors. And as Jonathan mentioned, many of these employers, when they are asked, they do identify the skilled workforce as part of the reason that they are based in this region. But the study also points to the variety of different the different types of occupations that are important to employers. So not important just to one employer, but to a host of different employers. And this may have some workforce implications. And it's not just about higher education. Some of this are indeed degree requiring fields, so programmers, statisticians, but others like drafters and people working on manufacturing lines also show up as the occupations that are shared between many of the regional employers. So the list of the sectors and the list of the occupations that are important I haven't included here, but it's quite a big list, and it's part of the report. And with that, I'll turn it over to Lee.
Thank you, Nebiyou. So just wanted to let you know sort of what our next step is, having completed this study. We're currently working with the Minnesota Department of Transportation. Phil Barnes is here, who's our client for that project, where we're looking at industries around the state, and particularly those that have linkages across the state, where they show up in multiple regions, metro area, and perhaps several other regions. And so we're going to be looking. These are the clusters we're going to be doing further analysis of around the state. I think particularly important here is we're seeing that there's several ways in which clusters in the metropolitan area are related to, if not directly linked to clusters in greater Minnesota. And so that's sort of our future work. Next year we're going to have a rural conference to follow up on some of this work, as well as other work at the Humphrey and University. Just want to give you a heads up on that.